The authorities in Pakistani Punjab waged a private war by obstructing supplies of fuel and essential commodities to the state. For all the 700,000 troops and human rights violations, Hindu India has never once imposed such a blockade on Muslim Kashmir.
They have made a Hindu identity for themselves, which was the inevitable goal of the Indian administration, which is why the Muslim communities of Pakistan, because we were so populous, were forced to make a Pakistan.
So for 40 years after independence, the only political party that stood for a Hindu identity was as much fringe and pariah as the AfD in Germany till recently.
India, even though it maintained a soft positivity towards Palestine and this idea of an overall multi-ethnic secular state as India, they started the settler colonial project from the very start.
Among other things that Article 370 of the Indian Constitution did was to make illegal the purchase of Kashmiri land by Indians from outside the state. As for plebiscite, we were absolutely dishonest. Nehru had other ideas. Less than a month after Kashmir's accession, he had decided to back out. Pakistan has invaded Kashmir thrice.
We had information that Pakistan was preparing its nuclear arsenal for possible deployment.
In the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir, we have a coalition of political parties legally allowed to contest Indian elections while advocating secession from India. In the Pakistani part of Kashmir, even advocating for secession is banned, let alone contesting elections on that platform. So, who's more in favor of self-determination again? How many people in the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir would want to vote to join Pakistan? While everybody is rightly concerned about the war in Iran in May 2026, this month also marks the one-year anniversary of another shorter war that could have been much deadlier. India's Operation Sindoor, a military offensive against Pakistan launched in response to a ghastly terrorist attack in Pahalgam in the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir. In less than 4 days, that conflict threatened to go nuclear faster than anything that has recently happened in Iran. And unlike the Iran war, both sides had nukes. Thankfully, that war ended, but the fog of that war still lingers. Unlike with the current war in Iran, much of the world still has zero intellectual or moral clarity about the good side and the bad side in that war. Many people in the West, including journalists who should know better, seem to swallow the entire Pakistani narrative due to previous biases or just throw their hands up in the air, equating both sides and just shrugging it off, saying, one side says this, the other side says that. I guess we'll never know. If you stick around till the end, dear listener, you actually will know. And I promise you, it won't be one-sided propaganda. You will be able to judge one of the world's most dangerous geopolitical conflicts for yourself. There's a fair bit of background context that I feel should be given, and I appreciate not everybody has the time for that. So if you can't wait to get right to the most nuanced discussion on the Kashmir conflict, you'll see in an online forum, jump right to the two-nation theory. If you're at all sympathetic to the Pakistani narrative on Kashmir and think that Pakistan has some legitimate claim to it, I'm here to tell you, Pakistan has lied to you for almost 80 years. Not to imply that other countries, including India, don't lie. But the Pakistani state is such a champion lie-deator that it makes the US look like an amateur. They have lied about the origins of the Kashmir dispute. They have lied about wanting self-determination for the people of Kashmir. They have lied constantly about their role in killing innocent Indian civilians through their terror network. They have lied about a gazillion other things. Let me just focus on the first two for now. There's a concept in psychology called stated preferences and revealed preferences. It's basically the difference between what people say versus what they actually do. The reality of their beliefs is displayed by actions, not talk. Pakistan's stated preference may be for self-determination for the Kashmiri people, but its revealed preference, in a similar case, is exactly the opposite. Why do I say that? Because self-determination doesn't mean that the people of Indian Kashmir will necessarily choose Pakistan. What if they reject Pakistan? What will it do then? The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. What did Pakistan do to a group of people who wanted to use their right of self-determination to secede from it in the past? Killed at least 300,000 of them and at least 200,000 of them, in 9 months in the civil war that led to the breakup of Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh in 1971. Pakistan loves to proclaim that Kashmir is the unfinished agenda of partition, when it couldn't even keep Bangladesh, that used to be called East Pakistan, and that was part of the finished agenda of partition by their own yardstick. Mark my words, Pakistan will never let the people of Kashmir have self-determination. While the world was rightly focused on the extermination and ethnic cleansing of Gaza in May 2025, Pakistani propagandists were taking advantage of this opportunity to further their own devious agenda to poison the hearts and minds of Western liberals against India. One glaring example of this was the Pakistani podcaster Amanullah Tariq going on Dimitri Lascaris' Reason to Resist podcast, trying to explain to Dimitri what happened in the recent 4-day mini-war between India and Pakistan that was in May 2025. Now, Dimitri is a courageous Canadian pro-Palestine activist and podcaster who obviously doesn't know and isn't even expected to know about the details of the conflict and its history. Amanullah took full advantage of Dimitri's unfamiliarity with the details and repeatedly deployed a very subtle psychological manipulation tactic that I caught. That tactic is to weaponize Dimitri's and his audience's sympathy for Palestine by implying that Kashmir equals Palestine and India equals Israel, and Pakistan are like the noble Iranians, the only good guys in this morally bankrupt world who are actually helping the little guy fight off the tyranny of the big bully. Amanullah kept casually slipping in phrases like prison camp, settler colonialism, and other such terms which have become widely associated with Israel, and tried to stick them onto India, hoping that no one would notice the trick. Well, I noticed, and I'm going to expose it for what it is. The trick is simple. Muslims are being killed by a far-right religious extremist government in Israel. Muslims are being oppressed, killed by a far-right non-Muslim religious extremist government in India. It must be the same thing, right? Right? Therefore, you, Western liberal, must support Kashmiri Muslims just like you support Palestinian Muslims. And then comes the bait and switch. We, the Pakistanis, support the poor, oppressed Muslims of Kashmir. Therefore, you must support us against India. Never mind if the whole chain of reasoning is flawed, because the premise itself is wrong. Kashmir is not Palestine, and India is not Israel. There are tons of false claims and misrepresentations Amanullah made in that podcast, which I would love to debunk. But those falsehoods permeate the entire structure of the edifice, starting right from the foundations and the ground floor, taking the elevator right to the roof of the skyscraper, and then floating off into stratospheric heights, untethered from reality, powered only by hot air. I could start by debunking specific claims he makes about Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, or the laughable claims about Pakistani armed forces' performance in the 4-day battle following India's Operation Sindoor. But I need to start right at the foundations. Because every debate between India and Pakistan goes like this.
Hey! Your terrorists killed 100 innocent Indians.
They're not my terrorists. They're 100% organic, free-range, locally grown, and responsibly sourced freedom fighters.
Dude, seriously? A known front group for a world-famous banned terror group enjoying 72 raisins in a hammock in your backyard claimed responsibility.
You have not provided any evidence.
They claimed responsibility. What more do you need?
You have not provided any evidence.
Here's the evidence from the last dozen such attacks from the last 30 years.
You have not provided any evidence.
We gave it to you 15 years back.
Huh? That? We used to be the world's biggest producer and exporter of terrorists 30 years back. But we don't do it anymore. We got ISO certified. See this certificate from the same auditing firm that certified that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction? Also, we never wanted terrorism to be our biggest export, but the Americans made us do it. They created so much demand and signed free trade deals with us and provided so many subsidies and tax breaks for offshoring and outsourcing terror that it distorted the free market. We were perfectly happy exporting heroin before that.
I just gave you the evidence that you're still doing it.
It's all because of you. You never held a plebiscite in Kashmir.
For far too long, Indians have either quietly shut up at this juncture of the debate or just not been able to debunk this Pakistani myth. So before I address Amanullah's specific claims about the 4-day battle or about terrorism, it is imperative that we set the record straight on the history of the Kashmir dispute in as unbiased a manner as feasible. You don't have to take my word for it. You can take his claims and mine and look at both our sources and judge for yourself. I understand that's a lot of work, but in 2025, you don't necessarily have to do it yourself. We have an incredible outsourced fact checker, which I encourage everyone to use, and that is AI. That is, in fact, what I used to keep myself honest while preparing this presentation. It debunked many things which I had previously absorbed, which actually turned out to be Indian propaganda. If you stay tuned till the very end, I will share an AI-generated comparative analysis of Amanullah's claims against mine, along with the prompts I used to do all of this. So all of you can see for yourselves whether I prompted the AI honestly or biased it to lean one way or another. Before we come to the India-Pakistan conflict, let's spend a minute on the Israel-Palestine one. For those who agree that Israel's actions in Gaza are potentially genocidal, let me begin by asking you, why do you not support Israel? Did the Holocaust not happen? And if you agree that it did happen, how can you ever entertain the notion that the descendants of victims of one genocide could themselves perpetrate another genocide? The answer is quite simple if you simply view the world through an objectively non-tribal lens. There are no permanent victim groups. A people can be a victim group in one situation and the aggressor in another. Who committed the East Timor genocide, for example? Oh, that's right, Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world. What comes to your mind when you hear the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free"? There are two major interpretations. The cynical one, which Zionists use, is that it is a call to a genocide of Jews and their expulsion from the land of Israel. The charitable interpretation is that it is a call for one state in which both Palestinians and Israelis can live as equal citizens, meaning a secular democracy that doesn't favor one religion or ethnicity over another. Now bring this framework over to South Asia. Who do you think models this better? Not perfectly, but just better. Pakistan or India? Let us now look at the relevant historical argument that directly led to the partition of India along religious lines and the creation of the state of Pakistan. The two-nation theory was an ideology of religious nationalism that advocated Muslim Indian nationhood, with a separate homeland for Indian Muslims within a decolonized British India, which ultimately led to the partition of India in 1947. Its various descriptions of religious differences were the main factor in Muslim separatist thought in the Indian subcontinent, asserting that Indian Muslims and Indian Hindus are two separate nations. The assumption of the Muslims of India of belonging to a separate identity and having a right to their own country also rested on their preeminent claim to political power that flowed from the experience of Muslim dominance in India. While simultaneously, it made identification with the former imperial Muslim power an essential part of being Muslim. I've summarized key sections of the Wikipedia article on the two-nation theory and linked it here so that everyone can go and check out the sources behind the Wikipedia article for themselves and to determine if what I'm presenting here is true or not. I also wanted to add a little bit of context to the text I've marked in red, which refers to the experience of Muslim dominance in India. You see, before the arrival of European colonizers in India in the 1700s, Muslim emperors had ruled the bulk of the Indian subcontinent for at least 500 years, starting with the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire. But militaristic triumphs of Islam in the Indian subcontinent go as far back as the early 700s, starting with the conquest of Sindh and Multan in current-day Pakistan by Muhammad bin Qasim of the Umayyad Caliphate. From this history arose the collective mythical identity of the Muslim League, the political party that was responsible for the creation of Pakistan. This identity had a significant element of ethno-religious supremacy. We Muslims, descendants of Arabs and Turks, ruled these inferior Hindus for 1,000 years before the British colonized us. How can we now submit to being ruled by these infidels? You will see this manufactured identity very prominently in Pakistani society today. They look just like us Indians, but most of them seem to consider themselves to be some form of Arab. Genetics hasn't apparently reached their school curriculum yet. They want to deny that most of them are descendants of Hindus who lived in the region for thousands of years before eventually converting to Islam. So I ask you again, if you're going to draw a parallel with the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is the side with the racist and ethno-supremacist claim to the land? Which is the side that says, we've always been here? And which is the side that wants to erase more than 3,000 years of unbroken history of the previous inhabitants of the land? Now that was about Muslim separatist arguments for the creation of Pakistan. What about attitudes in what became India?
They have made a Hindu identity for themselves, which was the inevitable goal of the Indian administration, which is why the Muslim communities of Pakistan, because we were so populous, were forced to make a Pakistan. Otherwise, what fools would we have been to separate this large territory?
They have made a Hindu identity for themselves. That was the inevitable goal of the Indian administration. This is a monstrous, evil lie that is the absolute opposite of the truth. For most of 40 years after independence, India was ruled by an avowedly secular Congress party, and occasionally by some non-religious leftists. The first time that a Hindu nationalist party got anywhere close to power in India was in 1977, as part of a short-lived coalition that was thrown out of office in 2 years. The next time it got anywhere close to power again was in 1996, and even that was due to the stellar charisma of their leader at the time, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who political opponents of the BJP called a moderate mask of a religious sectarian party. Indeed, their entire campaign in the 90s was centered on downplaying their Hindu nationalist ideology. The BJP eventually did become the single largest party in parliament in the 1996 election, but it was over 100 seats short of the majority mark. In such situations in India, usually coalition governments would form and muddle through for at least a couple of years before another election. But the BJP was so politically toxic in the Indian parliament that Vajpayee could not win a confidence vote, and his government lasted for a grand total of 13 days, a full 36 days less than Liz Truss of the UK. So for 40 years after independence, the only political party that stood for a Hindu identity was as much fringe and pariah as the AfD in Germany till recently. And people like Amanullah have the audacity to BS the world into saying that making a Hindu identity for themselves was the inevitable goal of the Indian administration. So what is the truth? Indians did have some form of parliamentary representation under the British Crown before independence. In the last parliamentary elections held under British rule in 1945, the Indian National Congress won a comfortable majority, winning 91% of the vote among non-Muslim constituencies. The Congress was the party of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, who became independent India's first prime minister. So what was the attitude of the people most Indians elected to represent them towards the two-nation theory? They firmly and categorically rejected it, only giving in to the demand for partition reluctantly under the threat of mass violence by the Muslim League. Gandhi and Nehru's dream was of a unified and secular India, with Hindus and Muslims coexisting peacefully. What does that sound like to you? A land without a people for a people without a land? Or from the river to the sea, everyone will be free? Now, this was an attitude of the overwhelming majority of Indians before partition. But partition was one of the bloodiest non-civil war events in human history, with mobs of Muslims killing Hindus, Hindus killing Muslims, Sikhs killing Muslims, Muslims killing Sikhs, and on and on and on. More people were killed in 1 year after partition than the total death toll from 20 years of the American occupation of Iraq. What effect do you think that had on the attitudes of the Indian people and the Indian leaders? Did they see the massacre of 1 million people as a reality check and think that, oh no, we were wrong and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, was right, and Hindus and Muslims actually can't coexist in peace? No. The first government of independent India doubled down on its rejection of the two-nation theory even after all this. For the next 2 years, they worked on writing up a constitution which officially made India a secular democratic republic, which guaranteed rights and equality to every person, Hindu, Muslim, or any other religion. Remember, India gave rights and protections to its minorities in 1950, 15 years before the US and the UK did likewise. Partisans like Amanullah Tariq like to take pot shots at the Indian Constitution, a document which was more progressive than the laws of the most self-proclaimed liberal democracies of the world at the time. Now, to be clear, versions of Hindu nationalism exist on the Hindu side as well, but they have only become politically dominant in India in the last 11 years. It could well be argued that they became politically dominant in India after India suffered a 25-year proxy war launched by Pakistan, using terrorism as an instrument of state policy to bleed India by 1,000 cuts, as many of their officials stated openly.
We had the biggest human displacements ever in the 1947 partition, as well as one of the biggest massacre and slaughters of human beings, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, all kinds of cultural identities during that partition time because of the way it was drawn up. No one principle was followed. Sometimes they would argue, the British would argue that if a place has a certain religious or ethnic group as a majority, then that would go to the relevant country. Sometimes they would argue that if the princely state, the lordship class that ruled over them belonged to a certain ethnic or religious group, then that would go to the... So there was no one metric or criteria. Hari Singh Nalwa, who was the lord or the feudal of the Kashmir Valley, who was a conqueror of the Dogra Empire, who had not only slaughtered the Kashmir people but had oppressed them, and had the abuse of the Kashmir people had peaked at that time. Actually, it was even much worse than during the British occupation. He decided to side with India.
He did not, though, did he? Did he? He did not decide to side with India, at least not initially at the time of partition, when all princely states were asked to make that decision. He did change his mind, and he did do it a few months later, though. Are you wondering why Amanullah skips that little detail? What happened in the intervening months that made Hari Singh change his mind? Let's dive into this period immediately after August 1947 that Amanullah just casually glossed over. First off, the man that Amanullah refers to as the lord or feudal of the Kashmir Valley is not called Hari Singh Nalwa. He was called Hari Singh. Believe it or not, Hari Singh Nalwa was actually a totally different historical figure in Kashmir who died almost 90 years before Hari Singh was born. Regardless, let's look at when, and more importantly, why Hari Singh eventually decided to side with India. At partition, states were left to choose whether to join India or Pakistan, or to remain independent. Jammu and Kashmir, the largest of the princely states, had a predominantly Muslim population ruled by the Hindu Maharaja Hari Singh. He decided to stay independent because he expected that the state's Muslims would be unhappy with accession to India, and that the Hindus and Sikhs would become vulnerable if he joined Pakistan. Pakistan made various efforts to persuade the Maharaja of Kashmir to join Pakistan. In July 1947, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, is believed to have written to the Maharaja promising every sort of favorable treatment, followed by lobbying of the state's prime minister by leaders of Jinnah's Muslim League. Faced with the Maharaja's indecision on accession, the Muslim League agents clandestinely worked in Poonch, that is a district of Kashmir, to encourage the local Muslims to an armed revolt, exploiting an internal unrest regarding economic grievances. Isn't that always there? The authorities in Pakistani Punjab waged a private war by obstructing supplies of fuel and essential commodities to the state. Later in September, Muslim League officials in the northwest frontier province, including the Chief Minister Abdul Qayyum Khan, assisted and possibly organized a large-scale invasion of Kashmir by Pathan tribesmen. The rebel forces in the western districts of Jammu were organized under the leadership of Sardar Ibrahim, a Muslim conference leader. They took control of most of the western parts of the state by 22nd October. On 24th October, they formed a provisional Azad Kashmir or Free Kashmir government. The authorities in Pakistani Punjab waged a private war by obstructing supplies of fuel and essential commodities to the state. Let's bring it back to the current day to clarify what this means. Anybody with half a conscience is appalled at the brutal siege of Gaza. I, a fully grown man, have often burst into tears looking at images of starving children on my screen. And yet, to a small scale, admittedly, but this was kind of what was done by Pakistanis to their own self-proclaimed Muslim brothers of Kashmir in order to liberate them. This is the true history. And yet, Pakistani propaganda has made Muslims and liberals everywhere believe that Pakistanis are the good guys in this dispute. For all the 700,000 troops and human rights violations, Hindu India has never once imposed such a blockade on Muslim Kashmir. So what happened next? Justice Meher Chandra Mahajan, the Maharaja's nominee for his next prime minister, visited Nehru and Patel in Delhi on 19 September 1947, requesting essential supplies which had been blockaded by Pakistan since the beginning of September. He communicated the Maharaja's willingness to accede to India. The Maharaja's troops could not withstand the tribal militia attack in September and October 1947. They were heavily outnumbered and outgunned by the tribal militias, and they were also facing internal rebellions from Muslim troops. The Maharaja made an urgent plea to Delhi for military assistance. Upon the Governor-General Lord Mountbatten's insistence, India required the Maharaja to accede before it could send troops. Accordingly, the Maharaja signed an instrument of accession on 26 October 1947, which was accepted by the Governor-General the next day. While the government of India accepted the accession, it added the proviso that it would be submitted to a reference of the people after the state is cleared of the invaders, since only the people, not the Maharaja, could decide where the Kashmiris wanted to live. Let us now look at the realpolitik of the situation. The King of Jammu and Kashmir asked India for protection against an invasion from Pakistan. India's government at the time used the leverage that the situation presented to ask for the state to join India. Now, Jammu and Kashmir is a mountainous region overlooking the northern plains of India. It is of immense military value, as you can both hide yourself much better as well as see much farther out when you're high up in the mountains. Mountainous borders are also much harder to penetrate than borders on flat land. India would have been strategically foolish to allow Pakistan such a huge military advantage over itself. So, when the opportunity presented itself, of course India took it, as any right-thinking country acting in its own self-interest would have. But notice that it was the Indian government itself that said that the decision would be up to the people of the state. There are a lot of Western and regrettably even Indian intellectuals who characterize India's rule over Kashmir as an occupation, equating it with the Israeli occupation of Palestine. Guess what is the difference between the two? Palestine did not have a sovereign ruler who had the legal right to sign his state away to an invading army and did so. Jammu and Kashmir, on the other hand, did have a sovereign ruler who had the full legal right to do so. But he still did not sign his state away to the invading army. He signed it away to a country whose army only entered the state after the signing. So, which one do you think is on a firmer legal footing? For a plebiscite, Jinnah demanded simultaneous troop withdrawal, for he felt that the average Muslim would never have the courage to vote for Pakistan in the presence of Indian troops and with Sheikh Abdullah, the first Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, in power. When Mountbatten countered that the plebiscite could be conducted by the United Nations, Jinnah, hoping that the invasion would succeed and afraid that Pakistan might actually lose the plebiscite, again rejected the proposal, stating that the Governors-General, that is, Mountbatten's office, should conduct it instead. For almost 80 years, Pakistan has run around the whole world ostensibly championing the cause of the Kashmiri people and pretending they just want self-determination for the poor, oppressed people of Indian Kashmir. And yet, at least in the beginning, it was India that had actually said yes to plebiscite, while Pakistan were the ones who said no. Something Pakistanis love to try and browbeat India with is that the Kashmir dispute is an unresolved matter before the United Nations, and that India must abide by UN resolutions on it. Let us now take a closer look at this part of the history. On the very first day of 1948, India took the dispute to the UN Security Council, despite opposition from Sheikh Abdullah, the most prominent Kashmiri leader outside of the government of the monarchy. The Security Council adopted multiple resolutions on the issue. Following the setup of the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 47 on 21st April 1948. This measure called for an immediate ceasefire and a three-step plan to resolve the Kashmir dispute. The first step would be Pakistani withdrawal. The second step would be Indian troop reduction to a minimum required to maintain law and order. And the third step would be the conduction of the actual plebiscite. These steps were supposed to be sequential. Each step was supposed to be a prerequisite for the next. Guess which step never happened? The one Pakistanis will never tell you. Step 1. It is also important to note that no subsequent UN resolution has overturned Resolution 47. Shortly after accession, the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir appointed Sheikh Abdullah as the head of the emergency administration. Sheikh Abdullah ran the affairs of the Kashmir Valley during the Indo-Pakistan War of 1947. Following the ceasefire achieved on January 1, 1949, Sheikh Abdullah was appointed the Prime Minister of the state on 5th March 1948. A Constituent Assembly for Jammu and Kashmir was convened to frame a new constitution for the state in October 1951, after an election in which all the seats were won by the Jammu and Kashmir National Conference Party of Sheikh Abdullah. Abdullah reached an agreement termed as the Delhi Agreement with Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, on 24 July 1952. It extended provisions of the Constitution of India regarding citizenship and fundamental rights to the state, in addition to the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court of India. Agreements were also reached on the issues of abolishing the monarchy, as well as the state being allowed a separate flag and an official language. The Delhi Agreement spelled out the relationship between the central government and the state through recognizing the autonomy of Jammu and Kashmir, while also declaring it as an integral part of India and granting the central government control of several subjects that were not a part of the instrument of accession. The betrayal of Sheikh Abdullah. Abdullah, however, sought to make Article 370 permanent and began calling for the secession of the state from India, which led to his arrest in 1953. On 8 April 1964, the state government dropped all charges in the so-called Kashmir conspiracy case. Sheikh Abdullah was released and returned to Srinagar, where he was accorded an unprecedented welcome by the people of the valley. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was independent India's first Home Minister under Nehru. He is widely credited as being the unifier of modern India, as he got almost all princely states on board to create the contiguous territory of the current nation-state of India. V.P. Menon, a secretary in the Ministry of States under him, had this to say about the Indian government's real intentions for the plebiscite. As for plebiscite, we were absolutely dishonest. Nehru had other ideas. Less than a month after Kashmir's accession and its accompanying pledge to its people of reference to them and of plebiscite, he had decided to back out. So here are my thoughts on the origins and the subsequent history of the Kashmir dispute. When we look at current geopolitical issues, we can easily recognize that there are complexities, multiple alliances, agendas, rivalries, clandestine conspiracies, lots of shades of grey. I keep saying that there are no pure good guys in politics. If that is the case today, why would it have been any different in 1947? We should not make the mistake of romanticizing the past. And we should try to imagine that moment in time with all the complex ingredients that I described. This is what we see if we look at the origins of the Kashmir dispute a little dispassionately. There is the complexity of different areas with majority Hindu or majority Muslim populations artificially joined together by the British into one single state. There are the competing desires of not just two, but three parties: India, Pakistan, and the Kashmiris themselves. There is the strong sense of independent identity of many Kashmiris, and there is the sense of religious solidarity with the Muslim nation state of Pakistan. There is also the skullduggery of the Pakistani government, which tried to take Kashmir by force, but not by using its own military, but rather an early prototype Mujahideen militia. There is the dilly-dallying and even the possible deception of Jawaharlal Nehru on the plebiscite question. You see, India's first Prime Minister had an emotional attachment to Kashmir as that was his ancestral homeland. And finally, there is the Mexican standoff, in which both India and Pakistan had to withdraw their troops in order to fulfill the prerequisites for a referendum, but both refused to do so because of not trusting the other to take advantage and seize more territory instead of withdrawing. And finally, there is always the ubiquitous shenanigans of the British and the Americans, who dreamt of making Kashmir a Cold War outpost which could be used as a launch pad for an attack on the Soviet Union, with the northern tip of undivided Kashmir being just about 20 kilometers away from Tajikistan, a former Soviet republic. Since Pakistan didn't achieve its objective of seizing Kashmir either by invasion in 1947 or diplomatically through the UN, it decided to launch yet another invasion in 1965. This was just 3 years after India had fought a war with China, in which India was comprehensively defeated. Its military, intelligence, weapons inventory, economy, and morale were all down in the dumps. It had recently lost its charismatic Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and was facing a bit of a leadership vacuum. Seeing India at its weakest since 1947, Pakistan attacked again, with the express objective of helping the people of Indian Kashmir rise up in rebellion to overthrow the Indian state. But the rebellion never came, and the Indian military mounted a shambolic defense that was nevertheless strong enough that Pakistan had to limp back to base, having failed to achieve the political objective of a war they had initiated. There was no plebiscite, but in a way, the people of Indian Kashmir had spoken. Not only had they not rebelled, they provided the Indian army with enough information to learn of the Pakistani infiltration, codenamed Operation Gibraltar, and the fact that the Indian army was battling not insurgents as they had initially supposed, but Pakistani army regulars. The only reliable indicator of future behavior is past behavior. So what has been Pakistan's past behavior towards their stated goal of self-determination for the Kashmiris? I already highlighted how they invaded when the king of Kashmir decided to remain independent. Now we come to their self-proclaimed desire for a plebiscite for the Kashmiri people. As I noted earlier, the prerequisite for a plebiscite was for both the Indian and the Pakistani armies to withdraw completely from the state. So what indicators of past behavior can we look to from both India and Pakistan? When India defeated Pakistan comprehensively in the 1971 war and liberated Bangladesh, it also captured 93,000 Pakistani soldiers and more than 15,000 square kilometers of Pakistani territory. After winning the war and having its boot on Pakistan's neck, what did India do? Released the 93,000 POWs in the largest such exchange since World War II. India also gave back the Pakistani territory it had captured in a goodwill gesture. Compare this with what Pakistan did in 1999. Before coming to the Kargil War itself, I must point out that barely a few months before Pakistan's sneak invasion of Indian parts of Jammu and Kashmir, India's Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee of the Hindu nationalist BJP no less, launched a bus service from Delhi to Lahore in Pakistan, and he himself rode that bus to try and pave the path for peace with Pakistan. The US Secretary of State at the time, Strobe Talbot, likened Vajpayee's diplomatic outreach to Nixon's visit to China in 1972 and Gorbachev's opening of the Berlin Wall in 1989. What a peace dividend the world got from those other initiatives, from those other diplomatic initiatives. And what did India get? An invasion. Happening at the same time as Vajpayee's extraordinary diplomatic embrace. The Kargil War acted as a limited natural experiment that pointed to what might happen if the Indian army withdraws from Kashmir. You see, till 1989, the Indian and Pakistani forces had an unwritten understanding that they would fall back from their outposts on the highest peaks in this part of Kashmir during the winter months, when heavy snow and bitter cold made maintaining a forward presence there really difficult. This meant an undefended ceasefire line protected only by a code of honor, and that honor had been maintained for decades. But in the spring of 1999, when the snow melted and the Indian troops tried to get back to their forward posts, they were fired upon by people who dressed like local tribesmen, but were in fact active duty Pakistani soldiers in disguise. This is not my claim or a claim from Indian media. This was the admission of Lieutenant General Shahid Aziz, the then head of Pakistan's spy agency, the ISI. If you've been paying attention, you might have realized that's a 3 out of 3. Pakistan has invaded Kashmir thrice, but not once has it ever had the courage and decency to say, yeah, we're sending in our army, let's fight man to man. Every time, they have hid behind the mask of the Mujahideen, only to be eventually exposed. So, over the next few months, the Indian Army and the Air Force fought with one hand tied behind their backs. They had been restrained from crossing the line of control to attack these Pakistani troops from behind or even to cut off their supply lines. More than 500 Indian soldiers made the ultimate sacrifice in repelling the invasion. Then, on the 4th of July 1999, Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif met Bill Clinton in Washington, D.C. What happened next is an incredibly underreported sequence of events that may have in fact just prevented doomsday. But first, let's check back in with that sober, nuanced, sophisticated, truth-seeking voice from Podcastistan, Amanullah Tariq.
I remember one distinct column that I read as a teenager. It said, it was in Urdu, and the term that was used to describe India was badmast hathi, which means an elephant that is on a rampage. Like a bull in a china shop would be an appropriate example. That
the conflict in Kargil was now escalating, with India committing more and more of its much larger forces, extracting an increasing toll on the Pakistani army. And after 2 months of bitter conflict, over 1,000 soldiers were killed. What had started as a covert military operation had become a war, and soon an international nuclear crisis. Nawaz Sharif is now facing a decision. What should I do? So he flies to the United States to meet with President Clinton on Sunday, the 4th of July, 1999.
President Clinton raised with Prime Minister Sharif the possibility of this escalating to be a nuclear conflict. He told Prime Minister Sharif that we had information that Pakistan was preparing its nuclear arsenal for possible deployment.
He was shocked, I think. I think he acted to me like he didn't really know for sure that had happened. I knew my only real job on the 4th of July was to get Pakistan back across that line of control, under whatever I had to do to get it done, because otherwise we were just out there rolling dice, hoping to goodness that nothing terrible would happen.
President Clinton informed Sharif that he had prepared 2 separate public statements to be issued to the press that evening. Which one would be released was up to Sharif.
President Clinton said, look, I've got two statements. One, will commend you for taking the steps necessary. Two, I will say very directly all of my concerns about Pakistan today, including this crisis, including messing around with nuclear weapons, including bin Laden, the Taliban. I mean, he laid it on pretty heavy with Prime Minister Sharif.
After urgent consultations with his advisors, Sharif agreed to the withdrawal.
I had a cordial and fruitful meeting with President Clinton.
But all along, until Sharif visited the United States, the Pakistani government had been insisting that they don't have any troops there. Then suddenly, they're issuing an order of retreat and carrying their dead back to Pakistan to be buried in military graveyards.
You know how Western commentators keep saying something along the lines of, India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars over Kashmir. The next time you hear that line, ask yourself why it is framed in that way. As if they were commentating on a boxing match in which both the boxers are taking turns punching each other. Ask yourself why you have not been told that all 3 of those wars were started by Pakistan. As for Amanullah Tariq, he had the audacity to refer to India as a badmast hathi or a rampaging elephant when he's doing propaganda for a country that violates every agreement, launches a bloody proxy war lasting decades, tries to steal territory again and again, and when beaten back by an enemy fighting with utmost restraint, pulls a nuclear gun to our heads. Who is the rampaging elephant again? With all that historical context, let me now try to focus on the 21st century.
To be decided by a plebiscite of the Kashmiri people, which the Indian government has been avoiding because there has always been the fear that the Kashmiri people would side with Pakistan on their independence. There's no chance in hell that they're going to side with India because of religious and historical and cultural reasons, as well as the just constant oppression that they've faced in the last 80 years. Pakistan is pretty confident in its prosecution of the matter because regardless of if Kashmir even gains independence, Pakistan would still enjoy access to the waters of Kashmir because of the brotherly relations that Pakistan has maintained with the occupied territories of Kashmir.
Since Pakistan's last offense after its complicity in terrorism is exposed is to always play the India has never held a plebiscite in Kashmir card. Let us look at this question in a little bit more detail. At this point, I will concede a catastrophic, disgraceful mistake made by the Indian state. The Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir, like any other state in India, regularly held elections for the state legislature, from soon after the time that the state joined India. But in 1987, the Indian state almost certainly rigged the state elections and kneecapped a new Islamist coalition called the Muslim United Front, ensuring that a status quo party loyal to the Indian state won. This was a major turning point in Kashmiri history, which led to the start of an armed insurgency a couple of years later that is still going on to this day. It took almost 15 years for the political process to recover from this, but elections held from 2002 onwards have been declared to be relatively free and fair by international observers. But the question of secession from India has never been politically tested for viability. Partly because of Indian repression, yes, but also because the successor to the Muslim United Front, a coalition of separatist political parties called the Hurriyat Conference, has boycotted every Indian election since its inception in 1993, claiming that participating in an Indian election will give legitimacy to Indian rule over the state. I mean, maybe, yes, you can argue that, but then how do we get over this impasse? So the question of how much support the separatists actually have has never been pilot tested for political viability. That brings me to this news story from 2003, which quotes the chairman of this separatist group admitting that plebiscite is no longer an option. The head of the only political bloc that supports separation from India had himself said in 2003 that plebiscite was no longer an option. There is also another important complication to consider. You see, in 1948, the Kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir actually had its own army and its own police forces. If both the Indian and Pakistani forces had actually withdrawn, the state wouldn't have just imploded into anarchy. But that has not been the situation for decades now. Now, there is just the Indian army and the Pakistani army. If both withdrew their forces today, who would protect the people of the state internally? Especially when there are thousands of well-armed militants living there. Won't they have free rein to potentially unleash a civil war that might make Iraq look like a weekend picnic? You think UN peacekeepers who couldn't stop the Rwandan genocide carried out with knives and machetes will be able to stop thousands of militants trained like special forces operators, armed with Kalashnikovs, rocket-propelled grenades, and bombs and IEDs of all kinds? So, how do we determine if the exercise is even valid after it was first proposed nearly 80 years ago, but the prerequisites for which were never met? About the only somewhat recent neutral data we seem to have is a 2009 opinion poll conducted in both the Indian and Pakistani parts of Kashmir by Chatham House, Ipsos Mori, and Facts Worldwide. You can look at the whole report, which is available online, but I want to focus here on the key question of how many people would vote for independence. Note, this isn't talking about merging with Pakistan. This is talking of independence from both India and Pakistan. The black and white dashed line that you see is called the line of control. It is the official ceasefire line which divides the Indian and the Pakistani held parts. The regions in light blue to the right of that are mostly the Hindu majority region of Jammu. As you can see, pretty much nobody in these regions wants independence. The region to the far right of the image is the Ladakh region, a high-altitude desert region with almost half of its population Shia Muslim and a slightly lower number ethnic Tibetans. This region shows a 20 to 30% support for the idea of independence. But the main separatist heartland is the Kashmir Valley, with self-reported numbers from 74% to 95% of the population wanting independence. And no Indian who hasn't drunk the Indian government Kool-Aid can contest this. After all, you wouldn't need 500,000 troops fighting a 36-year-long armed uprising if lots of people there didn't want to separate. But this stat is not the clincher that most Pakistanis think it is. Remember, it is the attitude towards independence, not the attitude towards joining Pakistan. I'll give credit to Amanullah here that he does acknowledge this possibility, but most Pakistani propagandists will never distinguish between those two possibilities. They will always proclaim that they just want the right to self-determination for Kashmiris, never once acknowledging the fact that this right could mean that Kashmiris reject Pakistan too, not just India. If they really supported the Kashmiri right to self-determination, and Kashmiris actually want freedom from both India and Pakistan, will Pakistan guarantee to honor that outcome? After all, isn't that pretty much what happened in 1947? Yes, there wasn't a plebiscite, but the king of Jammu and Kashmir decided to remain independent. So what did Pakistan do? Invade. So what's to guarantee that if a plebiscite were to be held today, and the people of Kashmir voted for independence, and the Indian army withdrew completely, what is to guarantee that Pakistan wouldn't just invade again? They can't trust us, we can't trust them, and we're in this permanent Mexican standoff. And it's not just the Indian part of Kashmir that they're deceiving the world about. They have hoodwinked the whole world about the part of Kashmir that they have under their control. That part, which they call Azad or Free Kashmir, adopted an interim constitution in 1974, which is still in effect today. Guess what it says about self-determination, though? Section 7 of the interim constitution of the so-called Azad Kashmir disallows any activity that goes against the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to Pakistan. Let that sink in. In the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir, we have a coalition of political parties recognized by the Indian state and legally allowed to contest Indian elections while advocating secession from India. In the Pakistani part of Kashmir, even advocating for secession from Pakistan is banned, let alone contesting elections on that platform. So, who's more in favor of self-determination again? Let's now look at polling in the Pakistani part of Kashmir. While the numbers here are nowhere near as bad as the Indian part of Kashmir, they are still a substantially bad look for Pakistan. You claim Muslim Brotherhood with these guys, you claim to have given them azadi or freedom almost 80 years ago, yet almost half of them want to divorce you too? If you aggregate the numbers across the whole undivided state of Jammu and Kashmir, you'll see a very interesting statistic. 44% in Azad Jammu and Kashmir and 43% in Jammu and Kashmir want independence. What does this mean for the idea of Kashmir going to Pakistan? Almost half the people who were granted that wish actually regret it and would like to undo it. The embarrassment doesn't just end there for Pakistan, who keep claiming that Kashmir is the unfinished agenda of partition, implying that the Muslim majority state should have gone to Pakistan by default. A follow-up question the pollsters asked many of the participants tells us how many people in the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir would want to vote to join Pakistan. Take a wild guess what that number is. It's 2%. And how many people in the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir would vote to join India? It's 28%. If a plebiscite were to be held in undivided Jammu and Kashmir today, Pakistan can kiss it goodbye. And no matter what Pakistanis like Amanullah say, as the experience of Bangladesh shows, I can bet my house that that is a form of self-determination that Pakistan will never allow. Now I quote directly from the conclusions of the report. These two options, for the whole of Kashmir to join either India or Pakistan, are the only two options that were envisaged under the UN resolutions proposing a plebiscite in 1948-49. Yet, there is no evidence that either joining India or Pakistan would come close to obtaining more than a quarter of the total vote. So, this poll, in common with the two preceding polls in Indian Jammu and Kashmir, shows that, setting aside all other political obstacles, it is difficult to see how the plebiscite proposed in the UN resolutions of 1948 and 49 could play any part in the resolution of the dispute today. These are not the conclusions of an Indian politician or a journalist or a think tank with a vested interest in retaining control of the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir. These are the conclusions of independent and well-respected professional pollsters from outside the Indian subcontinent. The next time some Pakistani talking head invokes plebiscite as the counter to end all Indian arguments, please point them to this poll. This brings me to one of history's biggest what-ifs. What if India had been more honest? This is where we can definitely learn a thing or two from Pakistan, who keep admitting the wildest things and still getting away scot-free.
You do admit, sir, that Pakistan has had a long history of backing and supporting and training and funding these terrorist organizations.
Well, we have been doing this dirty work for the United States for about 3 decades, and West, including Britain.
So that's your argument that even though
that was a mistake, and we suffered for that. And that is why you are saying this to me. If we had not joined the war against Soviet Union and later on the war after 9/11, this Pakistan's track record, was not, unimpeachable track record.
If Pakistan can acknowledge that they used to support terrorism till as recently as 9/11, then why can't India acknowledge that Nehru was never serious about the plebiscite? Especially the current BJP government, which likes to blame Nehru and his policies for many of India's current problems. Even from a cynical political perspective, it would be like killing 3 birds with 1 stone. The first is that it would clearly shine a spotlight on Nehru and his administration and use it as a stick to browbeat his great-grandson, who is the principal leader of opposition in the Indian parliament today. That would be red meat for BJP's loyal support base. Just make sure it's not cow meat though. 2. It would gain India some credibility with the alienated Kashmiri people by acknowledging that the Indian state did in fact screw them over in the past, and offer an olive branch to move forward and actually make them feel that their concerns and political aspirations will be taken seriously, which might actually lessen the feeling of alienation and reduce the motivation, at least for homegrown terrorism. Unfortunately, this can only happen if the BJP actually imbibed the full secular spirit of the Indian constitution and looked at Kashmiri people as equal citizens to take care of, and not as the Muslim enemy to punish for 1,000 years of Hindu subjugation. While getting Donald Trump to admit a mistake and apologize might be easier than that, I don't see any other sustainable solution to the Kashmir dispute that doesn't include massive amounts of introspection and healing touches from the Indian state. And finally, third, it would also gain India massive international credibility by making it look less repressive and more enlightened. Now, hindsight is always 2020, and it's easy for an internet rando like me to pretend that I would have had the answers to a hugely messy geopolitical conflict which someone of Nehru's towering intellect, stature, and political support couldn't achieve. But it does make me wonder, what if Nehru had called Pakistan's bluff by getting up on the floor of the UN General Assembly and announcing that the Indian government is ready to withdraw its forces for a plebiscite in Jammu and Kashmir, and that the ball is now in Pakistan's court to live up to their part of the bargain first? Looking at the results of the Chatham House poll from 2009, this is something that could even be done today. So now we reach 2019, the year when the Modi government revoked Article 370, a provision in the Indian constitution that gave special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, but it had more autonomy than any other Indian state, thanks to being a disputed territory.
On the Indian side of Kashmir, however, India, even though it maintained a soft positivity towards Palestine and this idea of an overall multi-ethnic secular state as India, they started the settler colonial project from the very start, and they have been cooperating with the Israelis at least from the 1960s and 70s in how to resettle this territory.
Not all lies are created equal. While you have white lies and omissions on the benign end of the spectrum, this settler colonialism charge from Amanullah Tariq sits firmly on the end marked absolute, unequivocal, monstrous evil. Not only is this a lie in the sense of it being a deviation from the truth, it is the exact opposite of the truth. It's like telling someone that breathing air will kill you. You see, among other things that Article 370 of the Indian Constitution did was to make illegal the purchase of Kashmiri land by Indians from outside the state. Yes, you heard that right. While Israeli settlements in the West Bank have been reported by every credible media organization in the world since at least the 1990s, and we have covert West Bank real estate fairs in North America even to this day, Indians who were not ancestrally linked to Jammu and Kashmir had no right to buy land and settle down there. Till 2019. This is the kind of evil Pakistani propaganda that their mouthpieces are spreading across the world. Now, in 2019, the Indian government abrogated Article 370. I'm not at all a fan of the way this was done. Plenty of creative legal tricks were used to ram it through. Even the state's most prominent pro-India political leaders were detained. Curfews were imposed in cities and towns across the state. Schools, colleges, and offices were shut down. The entire phone services and all of the internet itself was shut down for months together. The level of repression used to ram this through was horrifying to people like me who actually care about civil liberties. I had heavily criticized the Indian government's handling of this at the time. But the fact that it was done in a sneaky and brutal manner doesn't stop me from questioning the whole morality of Article 370. It was supposed to be a temporary provision. Whoever wrote it up as a stopgap arrangement that will not be required anymore once the Kashmir dispute is formally resolved. I sincerely doubt anyone involved in drafting it imagined that it would still be in place 70 years later. Jammu and Kashmir has become as much a de facto part of India as the so-called Azad Kashmir has of Pakistan. Yes, The reason for the existence and continuation of Article 370 may have been the fact that it was a disputed territory, but what should happen, rationally speaking, when the dispute shows no sign of ending even after 70 years? India is as if Europe was one country, only more diverse with more languages, more racial and ethnic groups, and more religious diversity. There are more than 165 million Muslims living in the rest of India outside of Jammu and Kashmir. There are racial and ethnic groups in the rest of India that are more different from the mainstream Indian population than the Koshurs of Kashmir. So, when the Kashmir dispute shows no signs of resolution, even looking decades ahead, the question in the 21st century becomes, why should Kashmir still have special status and not be integrated into the rest of India like all other states with different religious and racial mixes were more than 60 years ago? Do you have any idea how it makes more than 1 billion other Indians who live as equals without a special status feel? At this juncture, I also need to debunk a vile, malicious insinuation that many anti-India propagandists make, that India has committed or is committing some sort of genocide of Kashmiri Muslims. You can look at UN bodies, the ICC or the ICJ, reports by international human rights groups, and the consensus view among genocide scholars. Unlike for Israel, not a single one of these sources claims that there has ever been any genocide in Kashmir after partition. There has been what is widely accepted as an ethnic cleansing, though. An ethnic cleansing of Hindus. You see, soon after the insurgency broke out in the Kashmir Valley in 1989, armed terrorists immediately started killing prominent Hindu Kashmiri Pandits and threatening the entire community to convert, leave, or die. This led to the exodus of close to 3/4 of the Hindu population of the Kashmir Valley, with close to 100,000 leaving overnight with just the clothes on their back and bare essentials which could be quickly packed into cloth bags. To this day, they continue to live as refugees in their own country. So when Pakistani propagandists like Amanullah Tariq use incendiary labels like settler colonialism to insinuate that there's been some forced demographic displacement of local Kashmiri Muslims that has been going on for 80 years, I would love to hear them talk about the actual demographic displacement that did take place, that of Hindus. Let me conclude this history of the Kashmir dispute by welcoming secular, liberal-minded people everywhere to view it with the lens that it actually deserves. The Kashmir issue is not just a land dispute. It is existential to the very idea of India. That is the idea that 1.5 billion people with more religious groups and languages than all of Europe can live together as equal citizens in one democratic nation-state that celebrates unity in diversity and does not need to suppress local identities to forge a national one. That is the idea of India. Kashmir going to Pakistan just because it is majority Muslim means that the two-nation theory won. It means that diverse religious and ethnic groups can't really coexist inside one democratic nation-state. That philosophy undermines the argument for viability of much of the modern West. It's like saying that white ethno-nationalists make more sense than Martin Luther King. So if you believe that Muslims and Christians can coexist in the West, and Muslims and Jews can and should coexist peacefully as equal citizens of one democratic Israeli-Palestinian state, you should really be in favor of the same thing in the Indian subcontinent too. Most averagely informed people around the world probably see the Kashmir dispute as a solely India-Pakistan conflict. But what if I told you that, much like in the famous psychology experiment on the nature of human attention, there is an invisible gorilla in the picture? One whose presence and desires might upset any calculations you think can resolve the dispute. That invisible gorilla is China, a country which fought a war with India in 1962, and which has a running border dispute with India in the easternmost part of Jammu and Kashmir called Aksai Chin, that has its origins in borders drawn by the British long ago. Although that region by itself isn't necessarily relevant to the current dispute between India and Pakistan, the region that India calls Pakistan-occupied Kashmir has become crucially important to the Chinese in the last decade or so. You see, China and Pakistan are close allies. In the 2010s, they took their friendship to the next level by building the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a tentacle of China's Belt and Road Initiative that created a rail and road network from China's Xinjiang province on its western border right down to Gwadar, a Pakistani port near the Iranian border on the Arabian Sea. This rail and road network gives China a major shortcut to the entire Persian Gulf and all the oil and gas bottled up there. Crucially to India, though, this corridor passes right through the heart of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. India's strategic rival, China, would have never been able to build this network had it not been for what India considers Pakistan's illegal occupation of India's territory. Think about how the Americans bombed the Houthis in Yemen for blockading commercial shipping in the Red Sea. That is how seriously superpowers take minor financial losses inflicted by others. If there was a war tomorrow between India and Pakistan, in which India even inadvertently attacked Chinese infrastructure in this region, what do you think China would do? Would China not join forces with Pakistan to retaliate against India? Doesn't this Chinese interest mean that what was once a bilateral dispute, or at most a trilateral dispute between India, Pakistan, and the Kashmiri people, can now never be settled if the outcome of that settlement isn't something that China approves of? Forget India militarily taking back Pakistan-occupied Kashmir for a moment. What if that long-awaited plebiscite was held tomorrow and the admittedly unlikely outcome of the whole state voting to join India came about? Would China accept that outcome? This is yet another dimension to the conflict that complicates things in a manner that are not at all as straightforward as the Israel-Palestine one. And this, dear listeners, is the bonus section. If you made it this far, I would like to sincerely thank you and congratulate you. It means that you're not looking for sound bites or a TikTok dopamine hit that only confirms what you already believe. It means that you really, really care about the truth. Some of you might still be thinking something like, the Pakistani guy says one thing, the Indian guy says the opposite. I'm not an expert. How do I know who's right and who's wrong? And if you're thinking that, I say, great, I love it. Bring it on. I mentioned at the start that it's 2025. You don't have to be the expert for a fact check. You don't need access to a respected historian or need to wait for an expert with an opposing perspective to maybe write a rebuttal in a few months or a few years. You have the world's greatest, most knowledgeable, and most unbiased fact checker right in your pocket. And that is artificial intelligence. If you're familiar with AI, you're probably thinking, I don't know, AI hallucinates and you can get it to say whatever you want with sneaky prompt engineering. Which is why, not only am I going to share the comparative analysis of Amanullah's and my claims performed by the latest pro versions of ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude, I am also going to share with you the prompts and the custom instructions I used so that you can see for yourself whether I have been honest with my prompting. Here are the custom instructions that I gave to the AI LLMs when asking it to fact-check Amanullah and me. These instructions make all the difference in the world whether you're going to get a reality check or an ego massage. Don't try to please me, make me feel good, or engage me in conversation for the sake of driving engagement to your platform. Act as an unbiased fact-checker and an expert on the topic in question. Act as a mentor and a tough but fair critic. Your job is to help me learn the most important info about the topic. Ensure any claims I make are valid, evidence-backed, contextually aware, and not cherry-picked. They don't have to be the consensus opinion of experts, but have to be solid in their epistemology. Watch out for black swan arguments, points which completely invalidate the bulk of a thesis. And finally, use Bayesian reasoning where facts are not well known. And here is the prompt that I fed into the AIs to fact-check both Amanullah and me. You are the world's foremost unbiased expert on the history of the conflict between India and Pakistan and the history of Jammu and Kashmir, starting from the period of the Durrani rule to the present day. I'm uploading 2 files along with this chat. One file contains a transcript of this podcast episode, that is Amanullah's episode with Dimitri. In this podcast, Dimitri Lascaris, a Canadian journalist, interviews Amanullah Tariq, a Pakistani podcaster. Amanullah makes many claims during this podcast, but I want you to focus specifically on claims made about the history of Jammu and Kashmir, particularly the dispute between India and Pakistan over it. The other attachment is a rebuttal that I have made of Amanullah's claims about the history of the Kashmir conflict. Act as a tough but fair critic and scrutinize each of his claims along with my counterclaims. Analyze my linked sources to see if I have cherry-picked any. Check if they directly contradict my points or rebut my claims, or provide context which changes the meaning and interpretation that can be drawn by a neutral and objective observer. In case both of us have missed important facts, sources, and context whose knowledge should change our views, add those to your analysis. Amanullah's transcript doesn't contain sources, even though some sources were provided on screen during his podcast, so don't hold the lack of sources in the transcript against him too much. Analyze both these documents and our sources and come to a conclusion on whose arguments are more factual and contextually accurate in their interpretation as well. Include logical fallacies committed by both of us as well. Make sure you don't hallucinate and come up with a final tabulated comparative analysis, which would be worthy of a PhD dissertation or an academic paper on the subject. Rate each of our major claims on a scale of 0 to 100, 0 being an absolute demonstrable lie or the worst possible bad faith interpretation of something, and 100 being the closest to the truth you can determine as an objective third-party expert. Tabulate these results and include a final overall score for each of us with a verdict of who wins and who loses on each claim as well as overall. I now present the results of the fact checks done by multiple AIs. I must point out that these AIs do occasionally get stuff wrong, so they did sometimes unfairly penalize either Amanullah or me. I have done my best to correct them in good faith. In the interest of time, I won't be reading through everything, but I will be leaving it up on screen. I would urge you to pause and read the AI analyses for yourselves. Out of a total score of 100, Google Gemini gives Amanullah 12 and me 97. Grok gives Amanullah 47 and me 87. Anthropic's Claude gives Amanullah 28.7 and me 86.2. Those of you who are familiar with AI probably also know that AI has a huge sycophancy problem. All LLMs are prone to say things they think the user wants to hear. My first check against that is my custom instructions and my prompt, which give it explicit instructions not to do that. My second check against sycophancy is the reverse check. I asked multiple AIs to redo the same analysis with memory erased and pretending to be Amanullah this time. Here are the results. Out of a total score of 100, Google Gemini gives Amanullah 14 and me 90. With me pretending to be Amanullah, ChatGPT gave Amanullah 38 and me 74. And with me pretending to be Amanullah, Anthropic Claude gives Amanullah 45 and me 84. I don't mean to toot my own horn here, but how was I, a random engineer nobody on the internet with no special expertise in history or geopolitics, able to achieve such a comprehensive victory in the eyes of 3 of the world's top AIs? It's not because I'm super smart or well-read. Amanullah is probably way smarter than me. It's because, as we say in Sanskrit, Satyameva Jayate. Only the truth wins. You could be a pedigreed Zionist historian, but you can't beat an average Egyptian comedian in a debate. Because no amount of degrees, titles, expertise, charisma, sense of humor can save you if you use all those in the service of lies and propaganda. Please replicate this AI fact check for yourself. Take my custom instructions and prompts and the transcripts of Amanullah's podcast with Dimitri and this video and feed it into your favorite AI. Post the output in the comments. I would like to see if others can replicate the same outputs as I got. Thank you for watching. Please offer your likes, subscribes, and comments to the algorithm gods and share this with at least one person who might be interested in increasing the truth and reducing the lies in this beautiful world. Thank you.